So if that's okay, I'm not going to spend much time on the Old Testament. We all know the passages. What's going on in Genesis 19? Yeah, the very famous passage of Sodom and Gomorrah. So it seems pretty obvious what's going on there. Then we get some of those Levitical laws in Leviticus, 2 different chapters where it condemns homosexuality. That doesn't seem to be the thing that too many people worry about. We as Christians think more about what the New Testament says. So if that's okay, let's go to the New Testament. I wanted to share 3 different passages with you. Here's one from 1 Corinthians that says, "Do you not know that the wicked will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor male prostitutes, nor homosexual offenders, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards," etc., etc., this big long list, "nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God." And that's what some of you were. It's not underlined in the original Greek, but I'm underlining that word "were." Why do you think I'm doing that? The change. Look at that list. That's a pretty impressive list of misdeeds, isn't it? And by the way, did you notice that homosexuality is not in caps and everything else is small? It just seems to be a part of the list of things that people are doing wrong. And Paul makes a really nice comment at the end. Isn't that a wonderful thing there? That's what some of you were. You were on that list. You're involved in that sort of thing. I don't know if you were here at the church about probably 4 or 5 years ago where people came on stage with a cardboard box or cardboard placard, and on one side it said involved in pornography or adulterer or something like that, and they flipped it around. They said, "But Jesus changed me." That just gave me chills to look at that. I love to hear people's lives change like that. I grew up in a Christian home and always had Christian influence and was here at Emmanuel, here downtown in the old Emmanuel faith. So I grew up in it, but to see people's lives completely change, I mean, just involved in some of the most horrific things possible, but thanks to the power of God, they've completely turned their lives around. So apparently that was going on even then. People were involved in some pretty bad things, and they turned it around. Here's another one. It's from 1 Timothy. Paul says this, "The law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane." Here's that list again. "For those who strike their fathers and mothers, for murderers, the sexually immoral men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine." So I like that at the end. Paul says, etc. It's bigger than that, isn't it? So again, it's not in the original Greek, but I like that word practice. Do you see the difference? That's what Scott Ray was talking about. It's not having the thought, it's going ahead and carrying it out. And he says that's the problem. So the law is for laying it down, saying that's wrong, for the people that actually take that step and carry it out. So it's the people who practice homosexuality. Let's look at that one in Romans 1, though. That's the one that seems to be the key verse. That's what Scott Ray talked about, and Alan Schleman, same thing. So it's that crucial part in the beginning of Romans. Do you remember what Romans 1 is talking about? It's kind of looking out at the world and talking about the people that have turned their back on God and what they've done to replace God. And the things that they suppress and the kind of behavior that they get themselves into once they've turned their back and said no thanks to God. So he says this, they being the people who have turned their back on God, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. That's sad, isn't it? It's an awfully sad comment, to turn their back on the most awe-inspiring being that you can imagine and worship something here on earth. How sad is that? Whether it's money or whether it really is worshiping some kind of idol or something, we've given up so much if we do that. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for the women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. And the reason Alan Schleman and Scott Ray and others point to this as being the most powerful verse is because it's arguing from design, isn't it? From design. People were designed to function sexually in a certain way, and this is absolutely unnatural. I mean, there's no way that you can argue around it. I'm going to give you a few points in just a second to elaborate on that. But it's just simply the design argument. How are we supposed to function? This is not how we're supposed to function. So what are people doing? They're saying, well, in their minds, I suppose, they're saying, I don't care that God designed me a certain way. I don't think there's a God, or I don't trust this God. And so I'm going to turn around and do something that's absolutely shaking my fist at design. I'm shaking my fist at the whole idea of a God-ordained physical setup. And we're going to see this with the transgender community a little bit later. But do you notice what yeah, Michael?
And now most recently, the secular society has put a stamp of authenticity by calling it a marriage.
Right.
Gay marriage. I mean, that's incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's no longer just acceptance. It has to be approval. It's that next step up. You can't just say, well, okay, let sleeping dogs lie. Now it's like, good for you. Right, so you're right. But you notice what the Bible doesn't say. It doesn't say homosexuality is the greatest sin, or that you cannot be friends with homosexuals. It doesn't say that. There's no verse that says that, so therefore run away from them. There's nothing like that in the Bible. So let's talk about what science, we'll start with what science says. We've covered a little bit about what the Bible says. That's not going to convince a lot of people that you deal with who are skeptics. They're not going to buy into the Bible anyway. So what if we approach it from the area of science? I always think that's a good way to deal with the secular world. They tend to nod their heads and they're far more accepting if you're talking about studies, if you're talking about surveys and things like that. Well, for one thing, I don't know how long this has been around, but we've been sold a bill of goods when we've been told over and over again that 10% of the population is gay. That's absolute nonsense. It's way smaller than that. And the transgender community is even smaller yet. But people are estimating somewhere 1.5%, maybe 2%, maybe 3% of the population. So there's the first thing to keep in mind. Secondly, it's just not, again, this is a good place to argue, it's not good for you physically to be involved in homosexual behavior. Anal sex, for example, is extremely dangerous. You have different tissues involved, and those. So, without being terribly graphic, it's not good for the system if you're doing some kind of sex that way. In Canada, they did this study, which really knocked me out. They found that people who got themselves in this sort of behavior, homosexual behavior, had all sorts of mental health issues that came alongside of it. And so things like anxiety, schizophrenia, psychoses. And this is in Canada. See, if you didn't hear that it was Canada, you'd say, well, sure, it's because the society condemns them and puts them down and they feel bad and it just wrecks them psychologically. This was in Canada, where Canada says, good for you, and is very approving. And so here's a society that did a study of people immersed in that society, and still, these kinds of things seem to come alongside homosexuality. Not good at all. There's more substance abuse involved with people who are in the homosexual lifestyle. 50,000 new HIV cases yearly, half of them come from homosexuality. So we've got all sorts of things that are coming physically to people along this way. Yes?
On Google News this morning, they just reported that there's been a dramatic rise in STDs. What we don't really think about anymore, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, all that. And I believe they reported that like 2/3 of all this is involved in the homosexual community.
Wow. And these things are not treatable as well as they used to be, right?
They said gonorrhea is getting less and less treatable, I believe.
Yeah. Rick?
Yeah, just through the fire, I was a firefighter for 25 years, but the homosexual community has the highest incidence of revenge fires. Getting at each other, revenge fires.
Wow.
The highest beating each other up.
Really?
Not very happy people. We had suicides from ones that somebody left. I had one where homosexual, maybe lesbians, one lesbian took up with a guy, and the other lesbian sat in the car and killed herself. We had to deal with that. But suicides, revenge fires, beating on each other. They're very unhappy people.
Wow, that's which is awful because they somehow hijacked the word gay. I don't know how that all started either.
And the rainbow.
And the rainbow. Yeah, all those pretty colors. Wow.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Schizophrenia is a mental illness that has a chemical imbalance in the brain. So I doubt whether you can associate bipolar and schizophrenia with the fact that they are homosexuals. They probably have that chemical imbalance in their brain, and it's activated through some incident that occurred while they were involved.
Yeah, well, there may be mixed results. I'm just reporting the things I came across.
Well, the reason I say that, I have a son who's schizophrenic, and I've been through this whole thing for 24 years.
Yeah.
I've studied it, I've been involved with NAMI, Family to Family, NAMI, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. So I know you can be in a car accident, and if your frontal lobe is damaged, you can become mentally ill.
Yeah.
But I would think myself that those that are practicing homosexuality, if they have that chemical imbalance in their brain, they were born with it, that is probably what caused their
That may be a small percent. We're going to come across this idea of are they born with it? Somebody had a question or hand up over here, maybe?
Yeah, I was just going to say, were the mental illnesses a result of the behavior, or were they just present before to make them more prone towards the behavior?
Yeah,
it doesn't say that in that.
No, it's after they've already called themselves homosexual, and then they do the survey. So it's probably hard to tell whether they brought it with them or it accumulated as a result of that behavior. Dan?
You know, it's funny because you hear a lot of stories and you hear a lot of updates from the news of what they're learning. And my understanding is that one of the things I heard was that younger people are more apt to experiment, and then women are more apt to experiment than guys are. But women will leave it more than the guys would leave it once they're in it. But it's just so sad because society accepts it like this and pushes it even. And then here's these young people getting involved in this sort of thing, and then they realize 5 or 6 years later, oh my gosh, what am I thinking? I want to get out of this. They get out of it, and now they're all screwed up, and they just wasted 6 years of their lives.
Yeah, that's actually getting ahead of, that's good because it's something I want to approach in just a second here. Let's talk about the cause. That's what Bob was referring to here a couple minutes back. There's been this, well, I'll get to the issue in just a second, but I want to give you a picture of a boy with his dad and a little girl with her mom, because something goes wrong with these relationships that are so important. And so we as Christians have often thought, well, these people made this decision, they just are shaking their fist at God, that it was just a choice. And then from their perspective, you've heard often, it's genetic. I had no choice. I've always been this way, I've always thought like this. And we've had people searching for a gay gene, digging like crazy to come up with that, with 0 results, by the way. So that hasn't happened. It doesn't appear to be a genetic factor, and it doesn't appear to be a choice that somebody makes when they're 10, 15, 20 years old. Instead, and I'm getting a lot of this from Alan Schleman, who spent a lot of time working on it, and please help yourself. Take a look at his book here, it's really good. So he says the results that he's been looking at, the studies are indicating it's a developmental thing. So let me walk you through that and see if it makes sense. It involves what they call gender identity. So a little boy, that you saw the picture of that little boy and his dad, for whatever reason, the dad dies, the dad moves away, the dad turns abusive, the dad does something in the home where the kid is really turned off by the dad. He doesn't identify for some reason with the dad. Maybe he's been abused by a male, sexually abused. It could be 101 reasons. And for the girl, it's just the opposite. She doesn't bond with that mom. She doesn't identify with her mom. Again, it could be a threatening situation or whatever, but she doesn't identify with the mom. She identifies with the dad instead. Okay, then the next step is a person is attracted to the biological sex that's opposite of how they see themselves. So if the little boy doesn't identify with the dad and see himself as male, he thinks of himself and identifies more with the female, then what's a female attracted to biologically? A male. So that little boy then is going to be more attracted to the male. Now if it's a little girl, same thing. She doesn't identify with the mom. Her dad's the one that's comforting, who's there, who's a solid rock and not a drunk, or whatever the situation is. So she identifies with her dad, gender identity with the dad, and then sexually attracted to what the dad would be attracted to, which is a female. So we get the boy attracted to the men, the girl attracted to the women. So it's a gender identity that doesn't match the biological sex. Does that make sense? Okay. But I think it's interesting that in a sense it's kind of throwing out both extremes. Oh, you just chose it, you're just angry at God. You just want to experiment. And Dan's saying there are those people, and I understand that too. But on the other hand, this is not a case of I was born that way, I had no choice, it's just genetic. It doesn't seem to be genetic at all. So can people change? We're back to what Dan was talking about here. Yes, report after report, going back centuries, talks about people who have changed this behavior. testimonies. You can go on YouTube and find dozens and dozens of these stories of people who have gotten out of that lifestyle. They did, there were 2 reports I wanted to share with you here. One report said 7% changed without any therapy at all. That's nearly 10%. Just woke up one day and said, that's it, I'm done. I don't want that anymore. They did another study. It found 68%, that's almost 70%, 7 out of 10, gay 15-year-olds had opposite sex attractions 6 years later. And how? Spontaneous. They didn't get drugged by some psychologist someplace and arm twisted and drugs given to them. They just said, 5 years, 6 years have gone by. What was I thinking? Like Dan said, that's not me. And so this is what breaks my heart, to think that now in high school, there's where the 15-year-olds are. When they come out and say, well, I've got these kind of feelings, they're immediately affirmed for that. And they're said, good for you, let's go along this road, let's go down this way. And it's like, why don't you leave them alone and just see, they're too young really to make those kinds of decisions. Leave them alone for a while. But boy, the LGBT crowd is busy in high school. They're out of Palomar. It's just nonstop out of Palomar. They get this office. It's a really nice office. And they're advertised everywhere on campus. And I thought, I don't know, if you set up a straight club, would you get that kind of attention? I don't think so. But it's a big deal out there. Everything's about acceptance and all. And that's on the community college level. It's got to be 10 times worse than the Cal States and the UCs. Michael.
And hasn't the legal community said that it's illegal to promote changing of the gay lifestyle?
That's right. That's right.
For minors.
Yeah, that's true. Did you hear what he was saying? That what's the term for that? There's a term for working with them to try to get them to be more straight.
Reparative therapy.
Thank you. Yeah, reparative therapy. So now that's being outlawed and done away with. Well, I wish they'd do away with the other side, which is pushing them toward it. Leave them alone. I mean, look at this: 7 out of 10, if they were left alone, are eventually going to head back. It's an age of experimentation. You know what kids are like. They're all kind of goofy there for a while, and they get themselves off into some strange things. We all know that. Paint their hair green or whatever it is. And so it'd be nice if we just all left them alone, had some good input from parents. Be nice to have 2-parent homes where the parents really cared and were married, and a male and a female. We'll talk about that a little bit later as far as same-sex marriage goes. Somebody had Carrie.
It would seem to me that 7 out of 10 don't need any reparative therapy.
That's right.
Just
Yeah.
let them,
Yeah.
why spend the money?
Yeah.
And it-
But the problem is, you've got the other side that's working so hard with propagandizing and working them over so well. You're looking for an opposite tug there, so they're not in the clutches necessarily. So what can we do about this? Well, I've got a lot of things on the board here, so I wanted to spend a little time on that. We ought to avoid cliches. You ever heard that one? God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Ho ho. Those kinds of things, they're cheap shots, aren't they? And it doesn't score points. It's a turn off for anybody that has to hear something like that. So we don't want to make jokes. I read a story about a guy who was in a small group, and he felt comfortable enough one night. He wanted to share with the guys that he had some homosexual thoughts and urges. And as he sat down, part of that group, he heard 2 guys doing homosexual jokes. Ho ho. So that was it. He wasn't going to share, because he saw where that was going. And so it's easy to make these cheap shots that we don't want to do. I thought this is a good point. Don't make homosexuality the issue. It's Jesus. It's all about Jesus. And we ought to treat homosexuals like we would anybody. We need to be consistent. We want to make a long-term difference, not just score a quick point. And here's a good one. I like this last one here. Somebody brought this up. I was looking online. We're going to get asked, gee, you Christians are so homophobic. That's a quick one to label people with. If you don't agree, then you're whatever, phobic, right? That's the big term. Well, are we really being homophobic? That means we fear homosexuals. Well, I think it's a good answer. I'm not afraid of homosexuals. I'm afraid for them. We've already talked. The psychological damage, the physical damage, years of frustration and all. We're not afraid of them. We're afraid for them. Just like a neighbor's house is on fire. We want to warn them. We want to get them out of that house. This is our job, I think. Some other things that we could do. I think we're going to have to give each other a little grace as far as the Christians may decide slightly differently. For example, I'm going to talk in a minute about going to a same-sex wedding. homosexual wedding. Some of us may feel like that's okay, it's a place to witness. Other people may say, no thanks, that's terrible. So we may reach different decisions, and so we need to give each other some grace. We should be welcoming gays who are non-Christians to attend the church, but obviously not being in a position of authority, just like we would do with any other non-Christian. If somebody claims to be a Christian, but they practice, not think about it, but they practice homosexuality, there are places in the Bible, in Matthew and 1 Corinthians, that tells you how you discipline that person. If somebody has gay tendencies but tries to live according to Scripture, then keep them in the church. They should be part of the church, part of the body. What if somebody in the family says he or she is gay? Well, that's maybe shocking, and there may be actually a feeling of trying to lash out or something. We have to stay calm, make sure the person understands that we love him or her, and we need to treat them consistently. Any other sexual sin, we would treat the same way. So our goal, I think this is a really good goal, not to turn the homosexual into heterosexual, is holiness. I think that's a really good idea. We're looking for holiness. We want them to become disciples of Jesus. That's the ultimate goal. There are a ton of resources. I'll just mention a few of these. Again, I really strongly recommend, as far as easy reading, is that Ambassador's Guide by Alan Schleman. Dallas has written 2 or 3, I forgot his first name, 2 or 3 good books. Greg Kokel has Setting the Record Straight. That's the Stand to Reason guy. And there's a new one out by Kevin DeYoung called What Does the Bible Really Teach About Homosexuality? So if you want to get in deep as far as Old Testament verses and New Testament verses, that's especially good. And then 3 organizations at the bottom. You may recognize the first 2, Stand to Reason, and then the EQUIP stands for the name for Christian Research Institute. The last one is the Family Research Council, which ironically in the last few years has been labeled a hate group. You aware of that? Because they stand for Christian values. So this is where the society is going. If you stand for traditional values, you're now a hate group. But again, let's turn that around. We don't hate the homosexual. We're fearful for that person. We want to help them. We're not angry. We're not trying to take them out and stone them or anything like that. So these might be some things that you would consider. So I want to move on to the same-sex marriage, but I'm just wondering if you had any questions or comments about this so far.
I'm just
Yeah,
wondering
Mira?
about the Palmer College. You said that they let these lesbian and gays group come in.
Well, they have this really nice office for them. It's a beautiful office. They make a big deal about it. They make it's on their schedule of classes. They tell you it's there, and teachers all across campus post these little rainbow things that say "safe zone." I used to get so irritated at that because I didn't put it in my office, but it sort of implied don't go there because that's not a safe zone.
So it's
Hey, I've never had anybody complain about what I do in the classroom, so but what am I going to do? Hit my head against the wall there.
Is it
But
their organization that they?
yeah, the LGBT. Yeah, it's a student group, and there are faculty members involved with it that lead it, and one's in the English department. Are you surprised? And we have about, in our department, I kind of lost track because they seem to be hiring gays all the time. There were at least 5 gays in a department of about 20. So the whole tendency in the liberal arts, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but they're all touchy-feely people, and so they feel sorry and they start hiring them like crazy. And if you say, well, wait a minute, how do you hire somebody when you don't really know the person? Because you read what their works are as far as their curriculum vitae, their resume. It says what they work on. And you wouldn't believe how many say queer studies. And so the department loves that sort of stuff, so they've been hiring in that area. But yeah, they have a very well organized setup on campus. And that's a community college.
They're not outside groups. They're within. They're members
Yeah, it's
of
the
college.
students. Well, it's just a club like any other club. You can have an astronomy club, and you can have, so it's the gay and lesbian club. But all the other clubs on campus have to meet in the student center. We get because I was doing Ratio Christi. We would be allowed a space in there maybe from 11 to 12 o'clock, a certain day of the week or something. So that was nice. But the gay group has a different office somewhere else. It's completely different. It's not like it's one of the clubs. It's like a special attention club. And they have signs all over campus saying it's over here, it's over here. So it's a big deal.
They're segregated from the other?
Segregated, but in a good way. It's sort of drawing attention to it. Louise?
Yeah, we discovered a really good book on the subject, but it's deeper than a lot of books that you would find maybe on your list.
Yeah.
It's called Making Gay Okay.
Oh.
And it was printed by Ignatius Press.
The Catholic.
Ignatius is a Catholic book
Yeah.
publisher. However, we both read the book, and it is, there's absolutely no slanting of
Catholic doctrine.
there's no Catholic doctrine in the book. It's a really scholarly study. It's not a fun read. But if somebody wants to understand how it is that we got from the point where we understood that homosexuality was, for some people, normal. In other words, they always were, but they were rare. And their point of view was not pushed hard, like you say it is now on the campus,
Yeah.
which you realize does draw other people in who are iffy about the subject. That book makes it very clear where the movement that drew us to this point started, who pushed it, who drove it, and how we got to this point where now we find ourselves on the defensive.
Yeah.
And so it's not a polemic. It's just a book that explains the history of how we got from where we were when we were young to where society is today. And it's really helpful to understand it.
Sure. Well, you know, one name comes up again and again if you want to find out where all this deviance began. I think it was Kinsey.
Oh.
Kinsey's report. People back, was it the 50s? Kinsey's report came out. This is a guy that's supposed to be a sociologist, and he supposedly studied people, and he said, hey, you know, whatever percent of Americans are gay, and they do all these deviant behaviors, it's very common, don't worry about it. And that was the message, and it really soaked into American society, and it's been there for over 50 years. And then you find out later, this guy was the biggest deviant of them all, involved with sexual activities with kids, and he was involved with prisoners and people. So he got his statistics all screwed up on purpose. It wasn't an accident. Kinsey, just look up sometime. It's just chilling to find out what kind of person this was. But he's the one that gave us some of these, like 10% that's gay, and all these various activities are perfectly fine. It's just different. It's not abnormal. So thanks to him, we're off that road in big time. Okay, so anything else as far as yeah, no.
In Romans 1, where it says God gave them over, is Alan or anybody comment on that?
I don't think so. He just had pointed out it's a design argument there. What were you thinking of as far as God gave them over?
Well, it seems like there's some point at which, I don't know if it means God gives up on them or just lets them go.
Yeah.
But that seems to be ignored for the most part.
Yeah, it's pretty chilling, isn't it? To like God's hands come off, and there you go. You want it, you got it. You know, there's part of me that thinks with all this deviant behavior going on, I get real discouraged, and I think, wait a minute. I've heard this from several people, Os Guinness among others, who have said, you know, as society gets darker and darker, it's hard to live the way they're beginning to live. It's really hard to live a life without God. It's hard to say, so what's it all about? Just make money and then die? I mean, it's hard to live that kind of life, and then we can be the light. This may be like the Roman times. They had infanticide, they didn't treat the women well, and it was all about just power. And here came these little band of Christians, and they lit the match. And people said, oh, here are people that care about others. Here are people that have a community. They love each other, and they get together, and they take care of each other. They take care of the poor. They take care of the sick. Nobody cared about the sick. Nobody cared about women. And here women's roles were being improved during the early church days. So maybe that's our job as we become more and more post-Christian. In fact, Os Guinness, I like Os Guinness. I don't know if some of you know who I'm talking about, but he's been an apologist for a long time. His stuff is so good. He said, we're not going back. He said, don't get that in your mind that if we just elect the right person, oh yeah, anyway, thinking elections here, but it doesn't matter who you elect. We're post-Christian, and we've fallen off the trail, and so we're going to have to be that light, and we're going to have to watch what happens. Society's going to do some terrible things, but you can't live it. It's just hard to be that way. It's a pointless life. And so we will be the light, and we will hopefully draw people back to say, is there something going on? I just heard an interview, I think it was at Justin Brierley. He was interviewing a guy, and I forgot who it was, but the guy said that the churches in England are starting to wake up. Some of them, not all, but some of them are full again, because people have tried for 40, 50 years living as if there's no God, and it hasn't brought them a bit of satisfaction. And they're saying, isn't there something bigger than this? And we say, yes, there is. Richard.
Real quickly, my daughter, when she was at Point Loma Nazarene, she, as a senior, she had a young lady that was from Shanghai, China, and her father was a pastor when Mao took over, and they separated the family, and the girls went like to San Francisco, in other words, 400 or 500 miles to work in a slave farm, and they took the church away from the father because he was a pastor. The mother taught English instead of killing them. Somehow God put their hand of protection on them. And when Mao was no more, they gave the church back to him. And I did her wedding in Dallas. And so we met two female missionaries that went to that church to see what it was all about. And the building that was a church had an outside wall to it. And so between the building and the outside wall, I guess it was a protective wall to keep people out, they had speakers, and the church was so packed that it spilled out between the building and the big wall. And these two missionaries says, we were pressed against the wall, and we thought we were going to die because they were just squeezing the life out of us. And they asked people, why are you here? And they said, because we are so tired of killing and the communist way, we're going to try God's way. Exactly what you were just talking about.
Well, the other thing I was going to say to tie into that, he said the race is on in China. He said China is getting a large Christian population. At the same time, they're doing pretty well financially and economically, right? So he said there'll be a fight with the Christian view of things and secularism and possibly Eastern religions like Confucianism and things like that. So he said those big three, he said, which direction is China going to go? It's going to be a real interesting thing to see. So, another 20, 30 years of your life, just kind of keep an eye on what's going on with China. We get discouraged here, but Christianity is blooming in South America, it's exploding in Asia, it's growing in Africa, places that were 5% Christian are 50% now. I mean, it's just amazing, and they're sending missionaries here. Many places around the world are. How's that for irony? They see us as the great unwashed, so, all right. Okay, so how about same-sex marriage here? Let's go through some of the problems of it. It seems pretty obvious, but I suppose we need to. It's bad for children. And this is where I think that FRC.org comes in, that Family Research Council. I love Family Research Council because they don't just preach. They say, here are studies. These studies show. And they come through lists of things like this, as well as homosexuality and all, but it's bad for kids. Again and again, are you surprised? They've done studies that say it's better for kids to be reared by a married mother and father. What a shock. Why does the world find this so astounding? It just seems obvious, doesn't it? You got a mom and a dad who are married, so they're committed to each other, they have kids, it's better for kids. In fact, they've done studies. It's more important for a child's well-being than race. It doesn't matter what race. They're better off if it's coming out of a two-sex family. It's more important than the parent's education. It's more important than what neighborhood they're in. The best thing you can do for a child is to have a mom and a dad and a committed relationship. So again, can you see how we can use that in a discussion with the world that says, oh, you just don't like same-sex families? What do we say? It's better for the kids. We want things that are better for society. This is an improvement for society. Not to encourage this kind of behavior, but have a two-parent family, mom and dad. Studies have shown all sorts of psychological problems for kids coming out of these homes, here's a pretty scary thing. Non-biological, in other words, not the mom or the dad of the child. Non-biological caregivers tend to be more transitory, invest less time and resources, and frankly more dangerous for the kids. How about number 2? Here's another problem. What does same-sex marriage do? It pretends that men and women are interchangeable. Do you buy that? I mean, every family I know of, the male and the female bring different strengths, don't they? When you raise kids, if you've raised kids, you know what it's like. The mom brings things to that child, the dad brings things, and they bring different things. It's not interchangeable. The sexes are wired differently, but ever since the feminist movement, the idea is there are no differences. Every man and every woman is exactly the same, and we know they're not. Yes?
Yeah, but it seems that in those same-sex marriages, especially, well, with both the men and the woman, from my observations, is you've got one partner that pretends or is more male-like.
Right.
You know, like Ellen DeGeneres is probably the male, with Portia being the softer feminine
Sure.
side of things. So you've got one partner typically that's, you know, acting more as, you know, the stronger one.
Yeah. I still believe that down deep we're wired differently. Yeah.
You know, along those same lines, we have a daughter in college, and whenever I call her up, and my wife and my 2 girls laugh, but I always ask how the food is and how the car's working. And they just don't understand it. But I really do want to know how's the food and how's the car working. You know? But it's low on their list.
Jay Leno told a story one time. He said he just felt he really needed to talk to his parents and tell them how much he loved them. So he called up and he got his dad. He says, "Dad, I just want to tell you I really love you." And Dad said, "Here's your mom." How about number 3? Doesn't this open a tremendous can of worms? Because what are they saying? Well, we love each other, and so because we love each other, we should be allowed to marry. Oh my goodness, is that going to be the basis now for the relationship called marriage? An official blessing by the state and by churches and all. Is it going to be based on love? Well, then any 2 people can claim that, can't they? And frankly, I was chilled about 2 months ago. A woman in her like 20s, a pretty young woman, is marrying her father. Her mom is, I don't know what happened to her mom, but she's married. She says, "Well, we love each other." And you're thinking, wow, really? I mean, it just, it wouldn't stop with same sex. Why can't it be 3? That's coming, don't you think? Polygamy, that'll be the next thing that comes down, the next barrier that falls, the next wall that's up is going to go down. Once you push one down and say it's based on love, then it all goes away. How about pedophiles? That's lurking out there, and I'm starting to hear things. Pedophiles are going to say, "Well, who are you to say this 10-year-old loves me? Why are you putting something in the way of love?" You're going to say 18 is some kind of arbitrary age? Where are you getting that? That has nothing to do with love. She loves me, I love her. Wow, if that doesn't make the hair on your neck kind of move a little bit. Incest. There we go, father and daughter married. And I'm only half joking with man and canary if you're talking love. Why does it have to be bound within the species, the human species? How about tennis partners? How about 2 brothers that care about each other? I mean, people that are not, that are into the same sex thing, you're going to say, "Well, that's silly." And it's not really silly. You see what you're doing, you're just stretching their position. I just call it take it to the limits. It's always a good argument to say, so what's your position? What's your principle? Well, any 2 people who love each other should get married. Okay, so love's the basis, then stretch it. Well, so-and-so loves so-and-so, can they get married? No, that's silly. No, it's not silly. It's your principle that's silly. That any 2 people can get together, and as long as it's love, then they're okay to marry. How about number 4? We're starting to see this, aren't we? The state is going to get more and more involved. It's now a civil rights issue. You're taking my rights away from me. We're going to talk about that in a second. So what are we going to get? Government intruding into individual liberties? Parental rights are going to start disappearing? Religious freedom? We're not going to have that limited government that the founders set up. I mean, that's already going away, but I mean, can you see this is really going to be the snowball? That more and more government, it's going to require more government because a lot of us just don't get the system. We're not with it. And so you're going to require more lawsuits and the government poking its nose into every single aspect of life. How about number 5? It's going against all societies in the past. All societies. Do you know, for example, there was no culture in the history of the world, there's never been a culture that said homosexuality was equal to or better than heterosexuality. Now, did groups like the Greeks allow it? Yeah, they allowed it, but it wasn't ever put on an equal par. It was always something that happened, but it wasn't given the honor in the society. The Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, go around the world. It's never been the case where it's been as equal. And no society's ever had same-sex marriage. Boy, are we heading down a different path now. So we're the experimenters. We'll see where that leads. Let's take a couple minutes here as far as what's the argument in favor of same-sex marriage. I want to hear what your response is, and then I'll go to a slide that gives you some ideas if nothing is coming to mind. But here's one argument. It's discrimination. Have you heard that one? You're discriminating. You're not allowing me to do what heterosexuals can do. That's discrimination, and that's not fair. Any response you can think of, Eric?
We discriminate against blind people, giving them driver's licenses.
Discrimination is always... See, discrimination is one of those emotionally laden words, isn't it? You're discriminating, but we discriminate all the time. You're right. We don't let 10-year-olds get a driver's license either. Jim, is that
what I was going to say?
Yeah. So we discriminate all the time. I think it's...
Our dogs don't have driver's license either.
That's right. Yeah. Anything else you might say to that charge of discrimination, Louise?
Well, yes. Homosexuals and heterosexuals actually have the same rights. They can marry anyone who will marry them who is eligible, in other words, not already married, who is of the opposite gender. That's exactly the same right.
That's a good point. Look what Louise is echoing that. Every homosexual can marry, as long as it's opposite sex. If this is discrimination, maybe other people should sue. We're not allowed to marry because we're drinking buddies. We go out Friday night and drink together. Why are you keeping me from getting married? That's discrimination. Tennis partners. You're discriminating. You're not allowing me to marry my partner. All laws discriminate. We talked about the driver's license issues. It just depends, doesn't it? Discrimination can be good or bad. Don't you discriminate with your friends? Don't you discriminate with television shows you want to watch? Don't you discriminate with clothes you wear, cars you buy? We all discriminate. It's just that somehow they turn it as a nasty negative symbol when there can be very good discrimination. It depends on what you're discriminating about. If you're discriminating on skin color, that's pretty stupid. If you're discriminating because you don't want to hang out with a drug addict, that's different, isn't it? So you're not discriminating for silly, superficial reasons. There's something big there that you're afraid of. It's a problem. Dan?
I can see that, along your same lines. We don't give driver's license to 10-year-olds because it's dangerous for other people.
Yeah.
We don't give driver's license to blind people because it's dangerous to other people. But I can see the argument about discrimination falling apart because two people falling in love and wanting to get married doesn't hurt anybody, supposedly.
We'll get to that one too in just a second about it doesn't hurt anybody. Yeah, keep that one in mind. That's another argument, isn't it? Well, what do you care? You're married, so it doesn't bother you. Let us do what we want to do. How's that going to hurt society? How could love hurt society? Eric?
I don't even bother with the Bible part. I simply say society has a vested interest in the next generation. You will not produce it. Therefore, you don't get a tax break. Neither does me and my male roommate get a tax break just because we want to get, we're going to pretend to be married to say, we get, benefit of society.
Yeah. So here's that argument again. Why in the world has government sanctioned heterosexual marriages for so long? Because it's in the best interest for the next generation. They don't care whether you love your partner. It's just if you have kids, that's the best, most solid foundation for the next generation. You want a social society that works, you're back to the heterosexual setup. So the state is not doing it to discriminate against. They have found over the thousands of years that we've had society, that's the best thing for kids. Male, female, joined as a family, as a mom and a dad, have the kids. That's the best thing for society. Here's another argument. Well, you're treating us like people in the old days that were African American trying to marry a white and they wouldn't allow that. So that's the same level of discrimination that's going on now. Anybody feel like that's a poor analogy? Because there were these, what they call this miscegenation laws, where they wouldn't allow black and a white to marry, and so they'll drag that up and they'll say, see, you're treating us kind of like you used to treat those sorts of marriages. Louis?
I hate to say, be at it again, but the skin color is something that is physical, and homosexuality in terms of wanting to get married is a behavior. They're not the same.
They would say that's your opinion.
Well, no, I mean, it's just it's more than an opinion, it's a fact, isn't it?
It's a fact.
Circumstances are not the same, are they? There's really no difference between a black person and a white person. We're just talking skin color. It's pretty darn trivial, isn't it? And they say it's morally trivial. Sure it is. But there's a huge difference between a man and a woman. So we're talking big difference versus small difference. You're doing apples and oranges. You're comparing two very different things there to try to say, oh, you're treating us like the blacks and whites used to be treated when they wanted to get married. No, those are very different issues. How about this one? Here's another argument. Well, not all marriages have children, so that's like the homosexual world. And yet you're allowing them to get married, and they may both know ahead of time they're not going to be able to have kids, but you allow them to get married. Any response you can think of for that one?
These are pretty good arguments. They're pretty good.
You think that's a good one? Go ahead.
It's all falling in the
Actually,
same line.
we pattern for society, for the children that are growing up. We're presenting a pattern.
So,
Whatever we show children as normal is what they will think is normal.
okay. And you were going to say something too, I'm sorry.
It still falls in the same line of if it's best for society for a man and a woman to be together, then there's no way that they were told ahead of time that they weren't going to be able to have kids.
Well, and think of, you've heard that phrase, the bell curve. Most people who do get married have a chance to have children, but there are those few that are on the edges of that bell curve, and it's really unfortunate if they want to have kids, but they can't. So what's going on is the same-sex crowd is pointing to that small group and trying to make a general rule out of it, but they're not the general rule. They're not part of that big bell curve. They're part of a real small thing saying, well, let's base everything on what that little tiny group is going through by not having kids. That doesn't seem very fair. Here's another challenge. Freedom, the freedom issue. We should have the freedom to love whom we want. Is this an issue of not being allowed to love somebody? It has nothing to do with love at all. We're back to that idea of should society stamp an approval on something that's not as good for the kids? They can love anybody they wish right now. That's not what we're talking about. It's just, they want more than just being allowed to love. They want society to give them that beautiful certificate with a happy face saying, we like what you're up to. It's the approval that they're after, the legitimacy.
Well, that's because it makes their guilt not as harsh. You know, they won't feel as guilty if they get this stamp of approval.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's guilt there somewhere.
Dan brought this one up a couple minutes back. I think it was Dan, right? About, so what? Why wouldn't you let us do something? It's not going to hurt you. You have your marriage, let us have ours. Do you think homosexual marriage in any form can hurt heterosexual marriage or the whole concept of marriage?
Well, there's eventually going to be a problem if homosexual marriage is the norm. Your society, your race, your country, your whatever it is going to die out because there won't be any children.
Okay, I think somebody else brought that up before, that, well, already Europe is going through that, not necessarily because of homosexuality, but they're not reproducing enough. People are busy living a fun life as opposed to a useful life, and kids are kind of in the way of a fun life. They're anchors, drag you down. And so they're not reproducing, and so you're getting a shrinking population in Italy and Portugal and countries in Europe. And guess what's happening? Nobody's going to let that country go empty. The outside groups are going to come in. We've seen it in the last 6 months or a year from Eastern Europe or wherever, from Syria. So I think that's part of the argument. You don't want to see your country fail to reproduce because you're going to end up, somebody's coming in. You're not going to have a power vacuum there. But does it hurt heterosexual? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we just had the statistic that, 50,000 new cases of HIV/AIDS every year, and 78% of them were homosexual based from
Yeah,
the
50%.
50% are from the homosexual side of society. It's eventually, if you're bisexual, then you're going to bed with everybody, and you're going to pass it on to the heterosexual community.
Yeah.
That's happening too.
Yeah, that's right. So you got the disease angle. I wanted to approach it from something a little different. About 400 or 500 years ago in England, they used to have something called bear baiting. You heard about that? They'd capture a bear and chain them up in an arena and bring in dogs and see how long it'd take the dogs to kill the bear, or how many dogs died trying to take out the bear. So the Puritans and the Pilgrims, the early people that came over to our country, fought against that. They said, that's terrible. And you know what the same argument was back then? They said, well, if you don't like it, don't go. And the Puritans were saying, it's not that we don't like it, we think it's terrible for the whole society to have that kind of bloodlust going on. But it was the same argument. You hear this, here's another one, you hear the same thing, don't you, with television? Oh, you don't like the filth that's on TV? You have an off button. But that's not what we're saying. We're not saying, well, I just personally don't like it. No, what we're saying is, this is terrible for society. We're polluting society with that kind of immorality on television. So the argument about, well, just turn it off, or you have your heterosexual marriage, just enjoy your marriage, that's not going to fix society. We care about society. We're not seeing them as a threat to us personally, but it's the society that we're a little concerned with. Counterfeits always hurt the real thing. Think about money. Somebody cranks out their own $20 bills and they say, well, just don't use my money, I'll use my own. Yeah, but then everybody gets suspicious about all money. All money gets dragged down in that situation. And marriages are not just private affairs. There's a woman, I wanted to share this with you, Victoria Brownworth is her name. She's she's big on the same-sex thing. She says redefinition, quote from her, will almost certainly weaken the institute of marriage, and she's happy about that. She thinks that's good. So this is not just a case of everybody gets lifted like the tide rises and pulls up all boats. It actually is bringing marriage down where it's not really worth much of anything anymore. And they're discovering that's happening in Scandinavian countries and Netherlands. They've been allowing these same-sex registered partnerships. And guess what's happening? People are not getting married. Well, why should I? What's the point? It doesn't mean anything anymore to have society say, thank you, we appreciate what you're doing. So what? So it's dying. What's ahead? Well, I wish there was better news, but we're going to get more and more legal challenges, aren't we? Carrie was talking about that before we started class tonight. I know Emmanuel Faith and other churches are having to be very, very careful. They're looking through their bylaws, thinking about how they hire people, thinking about what they say, because you and I know that there are firebrands out there that are anxious to push it and just see what they can have happen in a church and to set up lawsuits and go to those bakeries and ask for those cakes. And take an immense offense at that, and there are law firms ready to go and start those suits against the baker in this case.
As you and I talked earlier, the legal challenge on it is not so much that, this, two guys can't get married and these two females can't get married, okay? You can make a good biblical argument that no, it's not okay. The problem is, once it's the law in the state, and let's say Emmanuel Faith says, well, we're not going to marry. And you go, well, so sue us. Okay, big deal. But you go, the problem is that the insurance companies that insure all this say, wait a minute, you're violating the law, okay, we're not going to insure you. At which point then, well, what do we do? $14 million for this, who's got it?
Yeah.
So it's a little lever there that's not real obvious, that all of a sudden just says, well, gosh, how are we gonna insure this place?
Yeah.
Do we give it all up for our beliefs?
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be on the leadership of the church right now. It's going to be very, very difficult, a real tight wire act to pull off. There's going to be more government spending, pretty obvious, because we get more and more people that are then free to get some of these things, Social Security, health insurance, and so on. And of course the churches, we'll see churches challenged as well. We ought to be prepared. So let's spend about the last 5 minutes talking about that. We're going to be challenged if we say anything at all out in society. And so Greg Kokel's the one that came up with this. I thought this was really good. This is just somebody that called him up one day, and I think he just kind of winged it and came up with it. I thought it was a really nice response. Somebody said, I'm at a job where I know my superior is a real fan of this same-sex marriage, and she's going around asking people, I know she's going to ask me someday, what do you think about same-sex marriage? And she says, I'm in trouble. I may lose the job. I mean, what am I going to say? And I thought Coco had such a great response. He said, why don't you ask whoever comes up and says that to you, just ask that person, are you tolerant? I'll answer the question, but I just wanted to ask you, are you a tolerant person? Do you see where this is going? Is anybody going to say, no, I'm not? And I doubt it. They're going to say, well, of course I'm tolerant. I'm part of the modern society. We're all tolerant. We're so tolerant these days. We're going to do tolerance next week, by the way. Boy, has tolerance gotten switched around. But okay, well, I'm a tolerant person. Then fine. Then you can say, all right, then I probably don't share the same belief you do. But that's part of tolerance, to put up with different beliefs. And so I thought that was a really nice response, rather than saying, well, I'm trying to dance around it because you're going to get in trouble. But turn it around. I'll answer, but are you a tolerant person? I like that. Now, I don't ask for an answer on this, but just something we ought to be thinking about. Would we go to a same-sex marriage wedding? We would if we were trying to build bridges. We would if we wanted to keep a connection there with that person and thought that over time, maybe we could sway them, but at least keep that line of communication open. Then there's the other side. There's the no side, isn't there? We don't want to be there and act like we're so happy and we're validating this and we're signing the guest book and good for you. So I don't think there's an answer to this. I think we may all decide different things on this issue. Just curious, keep it really short, but has anybody been invited? Okay, look at the hands. So, do you want to say, what did you guys decide?
I said no.
Said no? Did you do it in some kind of way that'll keep the lines open, do you think?
They made it very easy for me. I mean, it's a family member, and they're doing some, like a Harry Potter theme at a morgue.
So you start there. Start with that.
And they did everything online, invitation online, gifts, everything, the whole 9 yards, you know, yes, no. You know, I couldn't say why I didn't want to go. All I had to do was just check a box and just move me over to the next thing. So they know that Mira and I couldn't go. But nobody ever called us or sent us anything to say, hey, why can't you come?
Okay.
They know.
They know. And then you said the same thing, that you've been invited?
Susie's brother is gay, and had been in a relationship with a man young enough to be his son for over 15 years, and they decided to get married when the legal decision was made. So a year ago, February, we went to the courthouse. There were the two of them and us and the judge. And so we were witnesses. But it had to do with keeping the relationship open.
Yeah.
And as we were driving home afterward, I told Susie I felt like I was a getaway driver at a bank robbery. And she said, well, I felt like I was a missionary in India offering food to the hungry ones.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you kept up with the people since?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we see them almost every week.
Okay, that's good. So I'm not here to offer advice. Just a lot of prayer, and there are kind ways to turn people down, and there are kind things you can do when you're there. So I'll let you think about that. Maybe another tactic. I love asking questions. Again, this is a Coco favorite. Turn it around, ask questions. Things like, well, gee, do you think it's okay for people to marry if they love each other? Is that the basis? Anyone? And you know where we're going with that comment about man and canary, brother, sister, father, daughter. Is it ever okay to discriminate? Sure. We've talked about that. Why do you suppose, this is a question, again, you're asking somebody who's disagreeing with it, why do you suppose that there's no society that's ever counted these arrangements as equal to heterosexual? Were they all prejudiced? Or did they figure out over thousands of years this really wasn't the way to help the next generation? Are men and women truly interchangeable? I mean, this just flies against common sense in my book. Why has the government always preferred hetero unions? We're back to that issue again, because that's best for the next generation. Is it okay for us to just say marriage is anything we say it is? What happened to definitions? The words are now totally gone. They're totally meaningless. But I'm just saying these are questions that you might want to ask. And then as a conclusion, this is powerful because I think we're living this right now. Evil peddles tolerance until it's dominant, then seeks to silence good. And I think we've tipped over now. It's been tolerance, 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 but we're going to talk about that next week. There's only a certain kind of tolerance that's tolerated these days. And if you fall outside that, God help you. I mean that literally, God help you, because they'll come after you. So I don't want to end on a downer. I don't mean to do that. There are plenty of good resources that you can go to. Stand to Reason has this about 8x4 hard plastic thing they call a quick reference guide, and it's written in microscopic print. So they could fit a lot of information on both sides, but it's just one page. And so you could just have that around the house someplace. You can use it as a bookmark, and it's really practical. It's never going to get torn or ruined, and it's useful. I took a lot of information from that. There's something called the Ruth Institute. I hadn't heard of them before. But 77 non-religious reasons, which I think, again, if you're going to talk with people, you probably don't want to bring the Bible out unless they're really asking about the Bible, because they don't believe it, and they don't know it. And so that's probably a weak way to go. Well, the Bible says, well, you lost them. The eyes glaze over and they're done. But non-religious reasons to support a man-woman marriage. How about what is marriage? These are three people. One is, I forgot his first name, but he's a professor back east. Last name is George, really powerful writer. Jay Richards, anybody recognize that name? He's part of the Discovery Institute, and a terrific writer. You can get him on Facebook, and he always has really good things to say. He's got so many good articles. He's a real time sink. You know, he sucks you in for 20, 30 minutes at a time. So he's got an article in the Christian Research Journal. If you go to equip.org, type in homosexuality, type in same-sex marriage, there's just a treasure trove of stuff to find there. 10 arguments, there's FRC again, 10 arguments from social science, not from the Bible, not from how I feel, but from social science against same-sex marriage. Again, we want to have support that's not biblical support, things like we've been talking about tonight. It's better for the kids. That's a good argument. The top 10 harms of same-sex marriage.